The earth in all its beauty displays God's glory. And we are looking to cherish the earth, and that can mean hard work sometimes. It can mean sacrifice. It can mean changing our ways of doing things. And sometimes day by day, week by week, we are finding that we're being challenged to respond differently to God's beautiful gift to us, to share our faith through what we do, where our beliefs inform how we behave. This great and beautiful earth that God gave us to discover and to cherish.
Well, hello and welcome to St Mary's at Carlton. I'm going to give you an update on where we are with our work to reduce the carbon footprint of this big church. Starting off with some of the obvious things which I think most churches are really tackling, which is reducing our use of oil by cutting down the hours that the church is heated, which of course brings its own challenges. So we've introduced some wonderful blankets to produce warmth and comfort for members who might struggle a bit with the low temperatures in the church sometimes. In addition to that, of course, we've been looking at the lighting and the light bulbs and so forth to adjust that and reduce our carbon footprint that way. But in amongst that, of course, what's been happening in the past months has been issues related to the ageing fabric of the church, and that here at Carlton St Mary's has included some quite concerning structural changes. Not exactly failure, but it means that we're having to give a lot of our time to checking and analysing what has been happening to the fabric of the church. The issues around the structure of the church, the age of it, and the problems with some of the stonework has resulted in a gap in the chancel window of some size, which of course allows very cold air to enter. We're undertaking a survey window by window to look at where there's breakage, where there are gaps, and I hope that over the next few weeks we'll be able to get some repairs done which will result in that reduction in heat loss from the building itself. In addition, of course, we still have our big schemes, our big ideas, let's say, about reducing the cold air coming through on our West Tower arch, and the challenges of maybe partitioning the church to reduce the actual areas that we are heating. We're particularly pleased at St Mary's to be welcoming Katia Shoesmith as our new vicar, and she has introduced and supported the plan to become an eco-church. A small group of us are going to register for the Bronze Award as a start, and it will be a very encouraging point to follow up as part of our work towards becoming carbon neutral here at St Mary's in Carlton.
The feasibility study gave us a shock really, because it proposed quite radical solutions, and at the time we looked at this and thought they were too radical for us and would cost a huge amount of money and were really not particularly feasible, to be honest. The context of this church, though, is very different from the others in the group, because it's a large church in Skipton town centre, and we have footfall, people coming in frequently as tourists. We run a cafe and a shop as part of the church, and people come and go all the time, so effectively the church is in constant use, not just during service times. And it's also a medieval building with many historic features, and we have to take care of it from the heritage point of view as well. So conservation is very important. In other words, heating otherwise than by our gas guzzling and carbon emission producing boiler is quite a complex issue. Carbon neutrality was not forefront in the minds of the congregation when we started, and if you are proposing changes which are going to be accepted by a church community, you have to make sure that the community is on board with it and indeed engage them and hopefully ask them to produce their own ideas. So we formed a group which was kind of the Holy Trinity and St Augustine's end of towards carbon neutral churches in Craven, and we discussed what TCNCC was up to and tried to adapt it to this particularly complex situation in Holy Trinity, which is very different from the situation in the other churches. The other thing that the group has done, actually, which is quite important, is to organise services which celebrate this, because we've been determined always to see this in the context of the mission of the church, specifically the fifth mark of mission, caring for creation, and to try to highlight that through worship and the services that we've organised, which the rest of the TCNCC churches have been able to support as well. And in fact, the kick-off of the whole project, we had a service of commitment for everybody, and the bishop came, and that theme of celebrating creation in worship has been important as well.
So the steps we've implemented already at Holy Trinity towards carbon neutrality are fourfold, really. The first is involving the architects to draw up plans for electricity generation via solar panels. So they drew up a plan for the North Churchyard, and we also had a structural engineer in to survey the integrity of the south aisle roof to see whether it would bear the weight of solar panels. We've taken steps to reduce heating expenditure within the church, so we turned the thermostat down by 2 degrees centigrade for the church, and we've also reduced the heating hours for both the church and the parish rooms. Thirdly, we've taken steps to make sure that the building's functioning properly, so making sure it's not damp, so promptly repairing any leaks from the roof, and also repairing windows, window frames to make sure we've reduced heat loss. Fourthly, we already had a plan to carbon neutrality for 2030 agreed by the PCC, but that became obsolete within a few days because of a rupture of 2 heating pipes underfloor within the church. So we've now had to revisit those plans, probably draw up plans B, C and D. All those plans are going to be informed by the work that the Climate Environment Group has already done. I'm sure we're not going to be going back to a gas boiler heating radiators via a wet heating system, but whether we're going to have an electric boiler, heat pumps, what are the role going to be of under pew heating so that we're heating the congregation rather than the space, what might the implications be for the fabric of the church if we don't have it as warm as it has been. So a lot of factors to consider, and obviously the quicker we can get this done, the quicker the church will be warm again for next winter.
The church, it's about as different from Holy Trinity as it could be, because it's a small 19th century building and it's not much used outside service times, in contrast with the larger one, which is. And also specifically, there's no gas supply to the village, and the church has no water supply, so you have to think quite hard about what you can do. There is a group which has been set up. It's called CEG. It's ended up being called the Creation and Environment Group. But its remit at first was to kind of accept the findings from towards carbon neutral churches in Craven and adapt them to our specific buildings. So it's been quite busy. So we've been working in Drafton specifically. That group has been working with the parish council. And the result of that is a community energy group which operates separately from the church, but we help each other, and that's quite exciting, building community consciousness about environmental issues generally. The group is very important though. That's how the clergy and interested lay people have been involved in what's going on, and it's really important to be able to raise consciousness amongst people in general as you work through things. We have a relatively straightforward path, and we've started down that path. The first thing we did was look very hard at the fuel supply and who we're getting our fuel from. So we used Green Journey, and we had a lot of consultation with them and located a green fuel supplier, which was quite hard at that particular moment because it was a time where prices were going absolutely crazy, and there was a quite interesting few days and every time we got a quote from a green energy supplier and we asked everybody and then went back, it had gone up. So that was quite an interesting journey. Having got that one out of the way, we then embarked on the insulation project. Because of the way the church is built as a relatively modern construction, it is possible to insulate the ceiling. So we got a quote for doing that, and have got the necessary permissions and have started fundraising for that. That's a kind of positive step forward. That's quite a good start and very important. And where we go from there is not really decided yet. We're considering a solar PV array on the roof, but I think we'll see where we get to with the insulation project first, and how hard raising the money is going to be. It's going all right so far. So I'd say the feasibility study was useful, but it didn't sort of give us major specific directions for going forward. The conclusion was probably not really what we needed for Drafton, to be quite honest. It doesn't look like the sort of situation that merits an air source heat pump, so far as we can see at the moment. Because the church is powered by electricity only, in one sense, although there are people who disagree with this, in one sense you can say that if the grid decarbonises, then using just electricity you have decarbonised the church if you've got a green supplier. But we're not completely content with that. We need to think about a bit harder.
It's nearly 4 years since we actually started working on this project, and the feasibility study was done over a period of time in two stages. And we looked at the first stage and then we looked at the second stage. But what we've got to remember is that the world has changed so much in the last 3 years. The cost of energy has gone up considerably, the cost of food has gone up, the cost of living has gone up, and this has made such a difference to our congregation, to our income, and to our expenditure. The feasibility study was really interesting, but we found that using solar panels, which is the only option we've got here, would cost about £97,000 to install, and that really isn't possible for the small congregation here. So what we've done, we've looked at small steps to reduce the energy. I've had an electrician, a young, bright electrician, go around the church, and he has made very good suggestions which has already reduced the amount of electrical energy we're using. I've actually managed to reduce our oil consumption quite a lot. We're down from nearly 4,000 litres a year to 500 litres last year by moving the services from the big church to a small side room. All Saints has been partitioned, and the north aisle has been made into a separate room with a very low roof, which means there is very little heating required. And we now use an electric heater, electric blow heaters. As soon as you put them on, you've got heating in the room, and it's far better, far more effective than having the oil radiators, because they take 2.5 hours to begin to heat up. So if you look at a morning like today, a lovely frosty morning, if we had a 9:30 service, I would have had to have the boiler running from about 6 a.m. and it wouldn't be that warm then.
Since the first film, we've done a lot of research into other churches that have the same usage as our church. Our church is used for groups who need the church to be heated maybe 4 or 5 times a week. And we've realised that really we need to be heating the people and not the space. So we've decided to look at some different types of electric heating, and we're going to have a trial of 4 different types of heaters. And at the same time, we're going to be monitoring the humidity and the temperature in the church, because we want to make sure we're not going to damage the fabric of the building.
Coming out of this trial, we are putting together a report which will come up with some recommendations which the Church Council can consider. And they're likely to be for a hybrid pattern. In different parts of the church, we're going to have different forms of targeted heating. We're certainly looking at improving our insulation with curtains in areas where there's problems from draft, and in particular areas like over the organ or areas where children are going to be active, they'll have probably a very different form of heating, which will like to be radiant heating from wall units, looking down on where people are working. One of the things we've also needed to consider is, what does all this look like? This is a heritage Victorian building. People have worshipped here for a long time. They're very concerned that it doesn't look uncomfortably different. And so we've had some forms of heating mounted which haven't actually pleased us from a heating point of view, because to make them work they would have had to be suspended quite low over congregation running through the church. People would have felt warm, but they felt they didn't want that kind of visual impact in the building which they'd got to look at.
There are currently schemes where you can offset your carbon use, and we're considering, well, we've decided, the PCC has decided to start doing that from January as an interim measure, because obviously some of these things that we're considering are longer term, and so we want to feel that we are making tangible progress. So from January we're going to be doing an offsetting scheme, and we've done quite a bit of research into what we feel is a truly ethical process for that, and then hopefully the processes we put in for actually reducing our physical carbon footprint will mean that that is just a short-term measure, because we are aiming for true carbon neutrality and green energy production in the longer term.
In a way, we're at a midpoint. We know what we think we want to do. If it has the support of the Church Council, we then have to get to an implementation stage. And we're confident that if those fall into place, we can have this in and running by the end of 2024, which is within our target of being carbon zero by 2025. So we're on course. But this has been very much about us at EMSI, hasn't it? Across the group of churches, there are a wide range of approaches which people have taken, appropriate to their needs. And we're learning all the time that you start with small steps. It's rare that you can begin and map out the whole course right through to the end. But everything which you can do on the way, whether it's moving into the eco-church scheme and scoring some steps there, whether it's providing warm blankets on the back of the pews while you actually plan where you're going, whether it's actually involving your congregation and building up their confidence and their interest, whether it's about changing the way in which you heat. They're all relevant, but they're not going to happen at the same time, and it's not appropriate to expect that it should happen at the same time. We've recorded all this on our website, the aims, the progress, the false steps, the diverse ways forward, and we hope that that's going to be a really valuable resource which others who are contemplating this or engaged in it can dip into and pick up some of this experience. And we're very happy to be contacted and to talk to people about what we've done, warts and all.